Listening in on that is Lulu White from Elections Consulting Agency of Africa. Thank you, ma'am, for your time this morning. How would you characterize that moment?
For the Senegalese people, obviously, the release of a political prisoner or a prisoner who was arrested due to political tensions in the country is actually obviously something worth celebrating. And what Macky Sall seems to have done when he arrested this gentleman was to sort of turn him into a martyr. Even the frivolous charges in which he was arrested with, that he's corrupting the youth. What is corrupting the youth exactly? And that basically seems to have fueled his popularity within the region. So I think it's obviously something that is worth celebrating. The questions obviously that everybody has is whether, was the timing perfect? What was the reason behind such a late release towards an election? And that obviously remains to be seen, whether that was political manipulation or whether that was just to make sure that he places his political party in a better position.
That's just it, the inspiration behind this change of heart as well. It is somewhat attributed to the cause, but what do we know about why Macky Sall would have changed the posture?
Look, obviously, like many other commentators, I wouldn't know why he has changed the posture, but the Senegal, as a region in West Africa, is a very prominent and influential region, particularly within the Francophone structure as well. And obviously, whatever happens within Senegal actually has impacts, both negative and positive for the region, as it were. And obviously, I think there's been, I would expect that there's been a lot of pressure in terms of the international community. And going into this election, I mean, we all are aware that the reason why they pushed for a delay up until the 24th of March was because he wanted to push a constitutional amendment so that he gets a third term. And obviously that bid has obviously failed. So this change of heart could be politically motivated. I wouldn't say that he's doing it out of the goodness of his heart. I do believe that pressure mounting from within the region is likely going to make this election, or was likely going to make this election process ungovernable. And I think when he looked at, and he also, there's also many other developments that have happened in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and things like that. So I think perhaps it's one of those issues where he had to weigh the pros and cons of keeping Sonko in jail, and he realized that it wouldn't be in the best interest of his country and of this particular election if he actually kept him there.
What do we need to know about this country, Senegal? What do we need to know about it? So its political health, its economic health, its civic health, etc.
Look, Senegal, like most West African countries, unfortunately, as powerful and as influential as it is struggling massively with socioeconomic issues. The fact that also majority of young people in Senegal are also unemployed. I mean, these are the problems that really plague a lot of West African countries. Also, their activity within the ECOWAS as well. So, as an economic hub in West Africa, I think that it's strategically placed. Therefore, any any disruption within that particular sector of the continent would actually escalate and spiral out of control for the rest of West Africa. And I think it is very important that peace, as much as possible during these elections, is maintained, because, like I said, there are other Francophone countries that will be going into elections very soon. And obviously, any protest action or any form of disruption for this electoral process would actually have severe repercussions for the rest of the Francophone countries within West Africa.
Ousmane Sonko, Bobby Wine, they enjoy popularity more so among young people. And so this outpouring of jubilation, will it necessarily translate into a vote for the party for the candidate he is backing?
My view is that it certainly will. Remember, the Senegalese as well also have a two-term of office term of office when it comes to presidential elections. So obviously already that is why we saw Macky Sall trying to extend the term of office, the constitutional amendment, so that he can have an additional term of office. I think the writing was already on the wall that he will not be coming back into office. And any attempt, whatever this attempt was of the constitutional amendment, it was to make sure that he sort of legitimizes his stay in office, and obviously that has failed. And like I said earlier on, the fact that he actually arrested a young leader who was popular among the youth. And I think that's also another reason why we saw a lot of protests taking place there. But it also shows that people are actually wanting change. They are looking forward to the change. And Sonko being popular and the person that he is backing fire, there's a likelihood that they will emerge out of this election.
What do you perceive will bring about a change in Senegal? You could very well be describing any other country on the continent, right? But what do you perceive will bring about that change, and not necessarily hinging it on an individual or a party? What is it that is needed to blow the winds of change in some of our countries?
Look, participation in electoral processes, but also, what we have seen also is that more and more people are starting to not really trust the credibility of election processes. But obviously, as somebody who's an elections practitioner, somebody who believes very much in the principles of democracy, my obvious response is going to be, look, having a credible election that is full of integrity, where all opposition parties have access to the resources of the country as far as media campaigning and protection is concerned, is one thing that would sort of instill a sense of confidence among people that the electoral and democratic processes actually work on the continent. And I think that's what a lot of young people also in Senegal want to see. They want to be able to see that their vote counts. They want to be able to see, because the reality is that we have seen right there in West Africa the repercussions of what has happened over the number of years of leaders that have stayed in office unwelcome, where we've seen the coup in Mali, where we've seen the coup in Burkina Faso, where we've seen. So there's now that fear. I think political parties and actually political heads need to start understanding that the dynamics in which they were able to rule these countries are fast changing. You've got younger people that are now very invested in the country. And they are saying that they're tired of seeing corruption. They're tired of seeing a situation where countries are not changing. You've got very rich African countries who are sitting on the verge of collapse and poverty, yet they've got all of these natural resources actually benefiting the members of the country, citizens of the country. So I think the wings of change really do indicate that young people in the continent are tired, and they're willing to take matters into their own hands. If not through a democratic process, they will do it via a coup. So I think that is the reality that we are sitting in. We are sitting on a ticking time bomb. If African leaders are not willing to actually do what is right for their citizens, citizens are going to take matters into their own hands.
Ma'am, this particular country, Senegal, you've got young people who are making perilous journeys, who will get onto a boat to try and get a better life. And so when you speak of people participating, more so young people, because we are said to be the youngest continent in terms of youth population. When you speak of young people participating in the democratic process, there are some who are asking themselves whether democracy has worked for some parts of the continent. One, is that a fair question to ask? Two, if indeed democracy has not worked for the African continent, what would work?
Look, it is a fair country. That is a very fair question. And I think when we spoke earlier on in our conversation, I spoke about the integrity of electoral processes. Young people in the continent, particularly in West Africa, do feel that the fact that, people with money, with some sort of financial power, are the ones that actually win elections, make young people within the continent feel that they don't have control of what happens. During an election, and every election on the continent, we have seen how political parties would, dish out money to influence whoever is influenceable within the sector to make sure that they get the highest votes. And obviously that has created a lot of havoc. But there's also been a lot of, the word I want to use, a lot of doubt into the democratic processes. That is why you find a lot of countries, particularly when they go into an election, they would then make sure that there's international observer missions so that they can be there, whether they come for 3 months or long-term observer missions or for short-term observer missions, because people want to have a sense of the feeling that their electoral processes have actually been fair and have been credible. So it is a fair question to say, has democracy adequately served the continent? And if not, what has gone wrong? And the reality is that as much as we may not want to admit that some of the issues that people raise about the integrity and about rigging of elections are not issues that should be taken lightly, right? Where you've got international observers being blocked or being barred from visiting certain places, where you've got political parties, opposition political parties not being allowed to contest in certain areas, that does build an air that the election process in itself does not have integrity, it is not fair, it is not transparent, and that becomes a problem. Where do we need to go as a continent, or where those other countries need to go as a continent? It still goes back to the same thing, where there's a lot of voter education processes need to go into it, but also perhaps Africa as a continent would need to look at systems, electoral systems that used to work in the past, because it's not the first time that democracy existed in the continent. It's just that this time it's a brand of democracy that has been borrowed from the West. Perhaps it's time that the African continent looks at what used to work for the continent in the past, and they start integrating some of those principles that worked into the new form of democracy. Perhaps that would be something that would work. Because I know that we're always saying voter education, voter education, voter education, but voter education, when the system does not change, does not seem to help anyone in the process.
You speak of a ticking time bomb. In fact, we're seeing some young people burn instead of build this continent because it's not working for them. Some make perilous journeys. Those who can afford will take a flight out of the continent to find better elsewhere. How they are treated there is a conversation for another day. What is the intended, unintended consequence of this continuing for even another month?
Look, like I said, we are sitting on a time bomb. The continent is sitting on a time bomb, and I think we have seen late last year, early this year, what the perilous decisions have led to. And we always talk about coups. You know, when we talk about democracy and coups in the continent, it's almost as though we've made them normal. We've normalized them. Oh, no, there's been a coup in this place. But those are the unintended repercussions of what is happening in the continent, where people can no longer trust, because the lack of trust for an election actually indicates that there's a lack of trust in the country's system of governance. And when people feel that because they cannot trust the system, they would rather destroy it, and then if they don't destroy it, then they would take over via coups. And you've got we saw with these countries that I've mentioned, the large support in the Gambia of the coup, the large support in Mali of the coup, Burkina Faso. We saw the support, and that support came from young people and came from citizens of the country. And that in itself shows that because systems are not working in the country, people would rather support chaos.
Ma'am, thank you very much for your contribution this morning.